Okay, good afternoon. My name is Teresa Doherty, and I am the coordinator for Business and Information Technology programs here with Virginia Beach City Public Schools. This recording is intended to replace the essential training for the digital applications course. And we're going to be covering things like the state competencies for the course, the curriculum and objectives, and some of the resources that you might have available to you for both the course as well as your classroom. So I'm going to try and make sure that I cover everything here, but the nice part is this recording will be housed inside the digital applications course inside Schoology, so you'll be able to revisit it at any point. And we also have a discussions tab inside our Schoology course where you can place any questions that you might have about things that you learn about or things that you might like to know about that perhaps I didn't cover throughout the course of this recording. So this is a new option that we're pursuing this year. My hope is that in providing you a training video like this, it'll minimize the number of times that you have to take time outside of your contract hours to travel to another building and meet up for a meeting where you're inundated with information that you may or may not be able to absorb all at once. So this way you can kind of go back and look at this at your leisure. You can go back and rewind things that maybe you want to hear again, and like I said, post some of those questions in our discussion section so that you can get some answers not only from me, but from your fellow teachers who are also teaching digital applications. So let's go ahead and get started. What you're looking at right now is the course page inside our Schoology for digital applications. And some of you may already be teachers who taught keyboarding or keyboarding applications in years past, and I just want to make sure that you understand that digital applications is replacing the keyboarding course, but it is not a keyboarding course. So I know there was some confusion about that as we announced that shift, moving from this last year kind of retiring keyboarding as a standalone course and introducing digital applications in the 2019-2020 school year. Digital applications does include keyboarding, a component of keyboarding, but it's not keyboarding in its entirety. So on the landing page for digital applications, I have a short description of what this is. And the way that I like to think of it is it's kind of a smorgasbord for the personal computer aficionado. So it touches on a lot of different things. So there is some stuff on basic computer operations. There is some keyboarding. It's still included in there, and you'll see that as we go through some of the units. But a lot of it is going to be touching very briefly on several popular software applications. And you'll find that by and large in this school district, our focus is on Microsoft, but because this is one of those unique courses that straddles both middle and high school for high school credit, sometimes we have to be a little more flexible about what it is that we're using, whether it's Microsoft or it's Google or it's some other item. And VDOE doesn't necessarily specify that it has to be Microsoft, and so that's something nice about it enables us to be a little bit more flexible with some of that. So. This is, as I just mentioned, one of the courses that is offered at the middle school level for high school credit. So you're going to see folks on both sides, middle school and high school, who will be reaching into this course in Schoology to pull materials. Now, because this is a semester course, there are no certifications that are offered here. So you can kind of breathe a sigh of relief and take that off of your plate for this particular course. You might choose to make use of materials that are found in our Imagine Academy or on Geometrics if it's something that's available to you. And I say that because at the high school level, there are established computer labs that are still intact, where that might be something that is easily available. At the middle school level, because we're making far greater use of Chromebooks, you don't necessarily have a computer lab that's easy access for you. You may have docking stations, which work really well. However, it might make it a little more difficult to access Microsoft other than Microsoft 365. And I know that there are some limitations on that. So again, you don't have to worry too terribly much about that. because the students won't be pursuing a certification, so it's not dire that they have access to this at this point. However, if they are interested in pursuing a certification at some point, they can always be directed to our computer information systems course when they reach the high school level if they're not already. And our CIS courses are both year long. So there's a CIS course and then there's an advanced CIS course. And both of those have several certifications actually attached to them. So that's an option if you've got some kids who are interested in that, and maybe something that you can share with them. Also, a quick note about Microsoft versions. What you may have noticed is over the summer, the school district has shifted over from Microsoft 2016 to Microsoft 365, and that's pretty much across the board. So the personal laptop that you may have been issued, students' Chromebooks, those kinds of things, they're all going to have that Microsoft 365 version on there. However, for business and information technology courses that are offered inside a computer lab at the high school level, so this wouldn't impact middle school at all, we have elected to remain with the Microsoft 2016 version for this next school year, the 1920 school year. And we will shift over to the Microsoft 365 version in the year beyond that. And that was really just to ensure that we have all of the appropriate support from Microsoft for that, that there's curriculum available, that the certification exams that might align with that are all rolled out. So it doesn't have a lot of bearing in this course, but you might have some questions about that, and I wanted to make sure that I kind of popped that in there at the very bottom so that you knew a little something about that. So the digital applications course, and if you're ever interested, I always put a little description at the very side here. So this is actually pulled directly off of Verso in our CTE state website, and I'm going to go over there in just a minute and kind of share that with you. But in case you ever have parents who are looking, or you're looking for something to maybe, as you're creating your syllabus, you're looking for something to plug in there, that information over here on this side is really useful for something like that. This is the discussions tab, and that all of the Schoology groups have on them, and thankfully we've been with Schoology here for a year or so, so hopefully this is something that you're pretty familiar with. This is really kind of optional for you. It's a place where I wanted you to have the option to post questions or to put solutions, or maybe you've got a really great idea for an activity. And one of the things that I really like about having this discussion is that it provides folks who might be singletons, meaning they are the only person who is teaching this particular course at their location. So it allows these singletons to get together and have discussions without necessarily having to be in the same physical location at the same time. And that's something that I find to be really helpful, to kind of remove that block or that difficulty in being able to collaborate with other folks who are doing the same thing that you're doing. When you are a teacher in business and information technology, the courses and the preps that you have vary from year to year, and especially if you're someone who's teaching a semester, they can vary within that same year. So I would really encourage you to make great use of the discussions tab. It's something that I moderate. I check on it regularly. And like I said, it's not just me sharing out information, but certainly if you who are boots on the ground, frontline doing this, have questions, or you have solutions, or you've got some suggestions for a great idea or something that you might like to add, this is a great place to begin that kind of conversation, and just kind of let some things grow out from there. So most of the time that you use this course in Schoology, you're probably going to be on this tab. That's the resources tab. So eventually when this recording is completed, it's going to be housed in this very top folder titled Essential Training. So like I said, it's something you'll be able to come back to or refer back to at any point. Every course has this front matter, and I'll give you a chance to kind of go through that on your own. It just kind of is multi-page document that gives a broad overview of what the course is, and it offers some specifics on methods of teaching, and a little bit of pedagogy I think is probably tucked in there. So that's something that you're welcome to take a look at. I don't think you'll spend a whole lot of time in there. You're probably going to spend more time in these other areas, so probably resources to be specific, but I'm going to come back to this one in just a second. I want to reach through some of these others before we go back here. The one that I want to look at next is the competency log. So student competency logs are something that's required for us to keep by VDOE. They have to be kept for 5 years. So every time you have students who come through your course, you're going to want to create a competency log for them, and there are a lot of different ways to do that. I would say keeping them electronically is probably the easiest way for you to do that. You can download them in a Word document if you like. You can put everything in an Excel spreadsheet if that makes your life easier. A lot of times teachers will have students download these, or they'll have it downloaded and they'll have each student create their own. And then as you go through the course, it's something that kind of gets completed by the students, and then you hold on to that. So that's something that you'll definitely want to pay attention to. The other reason you want to pay attention to it is this really should be the driver for your course, the competency records. When the students leave your course, this is the stuff that they should know well enough to be competent in. Now I put a link here. This is going to take us to that Verso website, but I put the link here because those competencies may change from year to year. For example, this year there's been a huge change across the board for TCE in workplace readiness competencies. There have been 21 competencies for years, and now there are 22, and that's something we're going to work on updating. But in the meantime, you have everything that you need up to date and accurate if you use this link for the student competency record. So very briefly, let me run over to the Verso website, since we're kind of on that topic right now, so that I can share a couple of things with you about that. So Verso is just the resource center that we use for career and technical education programs. So what I've done right now is pulled up the digital applications course that this is tied to. So we use the 18-week version because this is a semester course, and these are the competencies that are listed. And you'll notice that there, remember I said we used to have 21 competencies for workplace readiness, there are now 22. So we're working on making some of those things updated for you, but by and large, everything is that was there before is still there. It may have been rebranded, it may have been consolidated, and I think we've got 3 new things that have been tossed in there, but by and large, everything is about the way it was before, and we're going to work on adding the things that need to be added. So each of these competencies represents something that the student should be learning about. And I know that when you look at this list, it probably seems pretty overwhelming, especially when you're looking at 92 different competencies that are being covered over the course of a semester. So one of the things that I want to point out is that these first 22 that we talked about, these workplace readiness skills, these aren't things that have to be taught separate and apart as if they are in their own units. These are things that are kind of woven into other things that you're teaching. So when you're talking about things like learning how to manage your time and your resources, you're not necessarily having a standalone lesson on managing time and resources. That's probably part of a bigger conversation about a project that the kids are doing. So those are things that, and I've got a separate thing that will help you with that. But just know that those first 22 competencies aren't necessarily things that you are having to teach as a standalone, and hopefully that will alleviate a lot of that anxiety that may come from that. The same thing when we talk about examining aspects of an industry and addressing elements of student life, you're going to see those same competencies in every single TCE course. So again, these oftentimes are part of a larger conversation. For example, when we talk about elements of student life, they're talking about professional development and being a part of an association. So just like we as teachers are part of an organization that reflects the kind of industry that we're in, that's what this addressing elements of student life is about. It's talking about what are the goals of being inside an organization like that, what are the benefits of it, and how do we grow inside of that. So that's a big part of something that you'll see throughout TCE. So that's not specific to a digital applications course. That's really something you see kind of across the board. Something that you may notice as we're scrolling down here are these blue dotted lines around some of these competencies. And here's the good news. These blue dotted lines around these competencies mean that these particular competencies are optional. So that means if you find that you are running out of time, or perhaps we had, a snow day that turned into a snow week, and you're looking for ways to kind of combine some things, these are some things that you can pull out, and you don't have to worry about maybe not touching on that competency. So these are optional. The other thing that you can always do with things like this is to take a look at what you have in the optional category and save that for an enrichment activity outside toward the end of the course, or save that as something that maybe is covered in a virtual field trip or with a guest speaker, something like that. Something that might be kind of a fun learning day for your students, but not necessarily something that you have to worry about incorporating. So you'll see that in some of these, this is a pretty big chunk. And like I was mentioning prior to this, you're really going to find that you are breezing through a lot of different kinds of applications. So if you look at this word processing, I want to say, have like 11 or so different competencies, but really out of the 11, I think there are maybe 5 or 6 that are actually required competencies. The same thing with spreadsheet applications, which we call Excel, but it could be a lot of different things as long as it's a spreadsheet application. There are 5 competencies here, but really only 4 are included. So it really is you not necessarily diving deep into each of these. You do not have to be an expert on word processing or an expert on multimedia. It's just kind of introducing the topic of this particular application and maybe what its functions are and what it can do and how it might be used or when it might be used. And then you kind of are on to the next thing. So the cool part about having a course like this is it really gives kids a chance to explore just a little bit of something, and if they like it, great. They can kind of make a note and maybe take a different business course later on that delves a little deeper, and if they don't like it, hey, that's great too, because you're already moving on to something else. So the other thing that I want to mention about these is if you're not sure what they mean by a particular competency, you can get a little more specific. So for example, this competency 81 says use best practices for data security. If I click on that particular competency, there's a drop-down box. So the drop-down box provides a definition that's a little more in-depth than just use best practices for data security, because maybe that can be interpreted a little differently by each person. So this gives you a much more solid view of what they're talking about when they say best practices and when they say data security. So if you're coming up with an activity or a lesson plan that is kind of circling around creating strong passwords and identifying symptoms of malware or a virus, you're probably doing pretty well. The other side to that is when you see some things like this, you may find that there is an additional way to an additional software application that you could maybe plug in that would be helpful. And in particular, I'm thinking of some things that we use for other courses. For example, we use Everfi for our personal finance courses, but there's also an Everfi course that relates to digital literacy, and that might be something that would be a great way to plug in and cover a lot of these things in a way that's kind of fun and interesting for your students. So the rest of that, by the way, down there, these are just related standards of learning. So all of these things in gray, that's not necessarily going to be something that you're going to spend a whole lot of time reading through. Don't stress yourself out about it. It's really just something that allows folks to say, hey, this is how this competency ties back to. So if you can think about the way information maybe is spiraled, this is a way that they do that, or that's kind of what that's related to. At the very bottom of this, you'll see something on every single competency that says FBLA competitive events and activities areas. And this really cuts both ways. It's both for middle school and for high school, because FBLA is the student organization for kids who are taking business and information technology classes. So what this does here is it gives them a really easy way to connect what it is that they're learning about with an activity or a competitive event that they could use in FBLA. So in this case, if they're doing this particular best practices for data security, one of the activities that they could do that would tie in with what they're learning about is cybersecurity. So one of the things, just a quick side note about Future Business Leaders of America, which is what FBLA stands for, is that this is something that is built inside the curriculum. So it's not an extracurricular, meaning outside of curriculum. It is a co-curricular student organization. So everything that the kids are learning about, it's going to help them with FBLA, or it's something that they can directly apply to FBLA. So this is all stuff that's built right into the competencies that they're learning about. So the link for this, by the way, is in your digital applications. And in particular, the competencies, I'm going to click back over here for a second so you can see the student competency records that are right here. Remember I said you could do it in like a Word document, a CSV, would be an Excel option for you. And if you click on those, it's just going to download it for you, and then you can choose to keep what they have, or you can modify it in a way that's easy for you. As long as you're recording that information, then you're fine. This, however, is linked through here. So if you click on this student competency record link that I have inside Schoology, it's going to take you right here. And that's the second item down. So you can always click on that top task or competency list and get right back to where we were before. So just know that that's right there. And if it were me, this is what I would recommend, is on your personal computer, the one that you use to write lesson plans and to grade and to get ideas and come up with projects, I would go ahead and save this. So your little star down here, I would go ahead and bookmark that so that you're able to get back to it much more easily than you would if, if you just kind of had to keep going back to the Schoology website and clicking on that particular link. Excuse me. Okay, so that's the competency log. Next down are the workplace readiness skills. So this is just some resources, excuse me, resources that might be helpful for incorporating those workplace readiness skills. Those are those first 21, actually now 22 workplace readiness skills. So these are just some resources for that. This kind of gives you some background about what workplace readiness is. You'll continue to hear a lot about this, both at the middle school and at the high school level. Your students will not be sitting for the workplace readiness certification because it's a semester course, so it's not something that they will sit for. However, it's something that they should be aware of, because these are those soft skills or those transferable skills that we talk about. So it doesn't matter where you work, whoever you're working for, even if it's for yourself, you're probably going to want a strong work ethic. You're going to want to have integrity. You're going to want to have some self-direction and some customer service skills. So those are some of those things when we talk about having workplace readiness skills. That's exactly what we're talking about. We want students to be able to think critically and be able to kind of have that overarching understanding of or big picture of what it is that their goal happens to be. So I just kind of wanted to give a nod to that so that you have an idea of what's over there and why we put it in there. Down below that is the FBLA resources, and I put a link to the competitive events for FBLA nationwide. So there's one for Virginia here locally, and that will take you for both middle and high school chapters for Virginia and who to contact and when the events are and how to start a chapter, all of that stuff. Same thing for nationals. I did put our state handbook in here because I think that answers a lot of the questions that you may have. And then also I put a list to the competitive events. That way you don't have to go digging for that. If you're looking for, excuse me, one in particular, because you've seen it and you're interested in it, this is a way to get a hold of that. So again, this is something that really should be kind of a background conversation that continues to go on throughout the course of your class. So it's not something that you're going to spend a whole lot of time talking about in specific. However, it is something that should be introduced, and it's something that you can reinforce as you're going through these different lessons, because for every single competency ties back to it somehow, some way. So this is a great way for you to incorporate that and begin that conversation with your students about being a part of something bigger than themselves, being a part of an association that celebrates and develops the industry that they're in. The next folder down are strategies, and these strategies kind of run the gamut. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure I put in here were some things that help you better understand things like gradual release, or between formative and summative assessments, how to differentiate instruction. And this is all stuff that I know that you probably know because you're educators and you're professionals, and this is all stuff that you learned at some point. But I also find that we can kind of get into a rut, or we get into a routine, and we fall away from some of those practices that are really beneficial to us as educators, but also to the students that we're trying to teach, and that we really want to inspire some learning to happen with. So this is something that I think is just a great kind of toolbox for you to go back and look into. And you don't necessarily have to use all the things, but you might find one thing in here that helps you better improve or enrich the learning that's happening, or maybe it just makes your life a little bit easier. So I'll continue to add things in here as I come across different videos or blogs or books or things that I just think you might be interested in. And you'll find that it really kind of runs the gamut. So stuff like classroom management strategies, I think, is a constant go-to. The stuff that worked for your teachers 25 years ago isn't necessarily going to be the same stuff that works here, because we know that culture has changed, perception has changed. Just like any other industry, the way that we teach and the way that we learn is always growing and evolving. So I love having something like classroom management strategies always on the back burner and looking for things that I can pull out of my pocket and try. Stuff like building student agency, I think, is really important, because we want our kids to take ownership of what their work is, and that helps us to help them gain that agency. So I like to put some things like that, where maybe you're struggling to do a particular thing in your classroom, or maybe there's just something that you want to try to do better. So I wanted to make sure that I put a few of those things in there. Same thing with blogs like this. I don't know if any of you have ever followed Cult of Pedagogy, but this woman is phenomenal, and I would highly recommend her for really just about any topic that you can think of that impacts us as educators. She's got a lot of fun different things, and her blog has podcasts that go on there. There are downloadable items, and I'm not talking about worksheets, but actually downloadable items for activities or things that help organize you as a teacher. And then sometimes it's just blogs that are a topic that might be of interest to you, whether it's teacher burnout, or, how do I incorporate the latest and greatest thing that I just brought back from a conference. So there's lots of really great stuff that's in there, and it isn't specific to business and IT, but it is specific to being a teacher and living that teacher life. So I really like that, and I always like to put a plug in there for that. Down at the bottom, I have a couple of suggested readings. Some of these are just make for really great reference books. So this one down here I really like as a reference book. Some of them are ones that you may have seen if you've joined any of our book studies or book clubs that we've done in years past. And Teach Like a Champion, I think, was on our ASCD reading list also. But this is just one that I really like. I find that I go back to it again and again. And it's just like kind of like those teaching strategies, the classroom management strategies. that I mentioned before, it's something that I kind of go back to and like to try different things out of. So that's a really good one. I would recommend picking up a copy. And again, this is kind of an ever-changing list. When I find stuff that I think will be helpful for you, I like to go ahead and put it in here. And so I would definitely check back just to see if there's something that might be helpful. You can use all of it, or you could choose to use none of it. Either way is fine by me. I just want to make sure that you've got some things that are out there, because I know life gets busy. I don't always get out to see everybody as often as I would like, but I definitely want to make sure that you've got a few tools in your toolbox that you can maybe reference even if you can't see me. The virtual learning days is not something that you're going to use until we get to the virtual learning day, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. I just want you to notice that it's down there. So when you start getting information about from your site administrators about virtual learning days and what are you going to do with this class, that's what you're going to do. You're going to come right into Schoology, you're going to click on that virtual learning days tab, and everything you need will be right in there. So the last thing that I want to look at on here is are your resources. And like I said, this I think is probably the tab that you're going to spend the greatest amount of time on. This is something that we'll have for each unit, so it's going to help you pace out what you're going to do. We try to provide at least one performance-based assessment and an associated resource or rubric that goes with it, along with some kind of unit plan. I'm always looking for ways to improve things like the essential questions that you see on there, the enduring understandings. I'm always looking to strengthen rubrics. So as you're going through some of these, if you find that there is something that has worked really well for you, or an activity that you would really like to share, or that you think would be a great performance-based assessment to hold up as this is something that we should let everybody know about, please feel free to contact me. I'm always happy to kind of update or change things around or give you a chance to try some of that as well, because really the best stuff is going to come from you all. As you're learning and you're growing and you're trying different things and experimenting and kind of improving upon the process, I find that that's really where the best stuff comes from. So, okay, so let's dig in. For this semester course, I think we have about 7 units, which is a lot of units to go through in about 18 weeks, but you'll notice that some of the units are relatively short. So for example, the first one is a single week, and it's been broken down into a unit, namely because it just didn't seem to fit with anything else at the time. And again, this is kind of a moving target, so you'll find that this stuff will shift around, but you'll notice that a couple of them that's 1 week, and then a couple of them are only 2 weeks long. So while it might seem like 7 units is an awful lot to cover in a single semester, just know that, you know, there are a couple of them that are relatively short, so you're gonna squeeze through those pretty quickly. So each of these is going to have the same basic information. So I'm going to click on Unit 3 here just so you kind of can see what's going on. So in Unit 3, you're going to investigate digital citizenship. And let me click back here for just a second so you can see. So Unit 3 is going to take you about 2 weeks to get through. And that's not a hard and fast number. So if you find that you get through it in a week and a half, that's okay. If it takes you 2.5 weeks, that's okay too. It's really just kind of a rough time frame. What I'm saying is, if you spend this amount of time on each of these units, then you'll be able to cover all the competencies that you need to cover by the end of the semester. That said, you guys are human, and so are the kids that you teach. And there are a lot of different factors that move in and out of your classroom. So just kind of use that as a rough time frame. One of the things that it should help you do is manage your time. So if you are finding that you're here at Unit 3 and it's taken you a month or 4.5 weeks to get through something, chances are that something has gone awry and you're probably going to want to regroup. That's a great time to reach out to me or to reach out to some of the other folks who are teaching this course right now to figure out exactly where they're at and maybe help you get unstuck. You want to be real careful about hobby teaching, which can happen when you find something that you're really passionate about, or that you just feel very comfortable with, or perhaps there are other things that you don't feel comfortable with, and so you wind up kind of putting those off and focusing a little bit longer on the things that you are comfortable with. So just, you want to be mindful of that, because the kids are still going to need to know the competencies by the end of that 18 weeks. You don't get to keep them extra time. So you want to make sure that you're kind of keeping an eye on that time frame. We also have outlined the competencies that are covered within each of these units. So you'll notice some of them may have more than others, but some of them may be some larger competencies, and that's why you're only seeing a couple within a 2-week time frame. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on this so you can see what's going on. For each of the units that you saw out there, those 6 or 7 units that we had sitting out there, you're typically going to see 3 things under that unit. You're going to see the actual unit, you'll see a project or activity, and then you'll see an associated rubric with that project or activity. So I'm going to try and click on one of these so that I can show you what happens. I will say that if you haven't experienced this, I have all the time. In Schoology, it often takes quite a bit of time to get something loaded or downloaded. So I find a lot of times with stuff like this that I do better if I just go ahead and download something so that you can see it. So I'm going to give that a try and see if that works so that I can kind of share that with you. In the meantime, though, what you will notice, and this isn't it, this is one that we're working on, but what you will notice is that they all kind of follow the same template by and large. So what you'll see inside this actually is very similar to what you're seeing on the background with this FBLA flyer thing that I'm working on. They're all pretty much the same kind of thing. So let me walk you through this real quick. Okay, so in Unit 3, there's a suggested pacing that we talked about, and we highlighted that on the front end of it. You're going to have essential questions and enduring understandings, and you're going to have some competencies on the side. That's under your dues. So those are pretty much going to be a place for you to start. The assessment that you're going to do for this, and this, by the way, these are just suggestions. So if you decide that you have something that works better, or you have an idea that you just really want to try out, you are not beholden to doing a public service announcement for your digital citizenship unit. So this is just something that we've offered up as a possibility, as something that might make for a great performance-based assessment for you that's going to incorporate the majority of competencies that are covered under this unit. So it's just a place for you to start. You may find this and decide that you want to kind of craft it out a little bit and add a few things. And if it works really well, hey, let me know. I'd be happy to add some of that stuff in too. Or like I said, you can certainly choose something that's completely separate and apart depending on what your preference happens to be. So in this case, there's a performance assessment that has to do with students creating a public service announcement in a matter of 1 minute of 60 seconds on how to be a digital citizen. So you're going to have your kids create a video. It's going to highlight at least one thing. So it's going to highlight best practices for digital device use, or how to manage their digital identity, or how to protect their data. So below that, we have the competencies. Below that, there are some performance expectations. So really, those are the kinds of things that should be reflected in the rubric. And then there's some general teacher instructions. So in this case, the suggestion is to allow for about 4 classes for this project. You may not need 4 classes. 2 classes may be just enough to get that done. Or it may be something that you have them split between their time outside of class and their time inside of class. Or you may be pairing it with some other project that they're doing, and you're having them gather some of that information or video or stuff like that. So totally up to you. This is not set in stone. None of this is set in stone. There are some suggested materials and resources. So same thing, I think I'd mentioned EverFi digital literacy earlier. this is something that would be a really great fit in here, but it's not a requirement. So you could always find your own, and there certainly are a lot out there, digital literacy information or games or videos or things like that. There's a lot of that stuff out there. So this is just the one that was suggested for this assessment. So there's some student instructions that are in here, some of the project requirements, some reflection, and then we can go back and take a look at the rubrics. So you can kind of take a peek at that and see what's going on there. This self-assessment and reflection is essentially the same in all of our courses. So it doesn't matter what class you happen to be teaching. This should really become a part of the process for you and for your students as you're going through an activity or kind of that thing that puts the bow on a unit. Because this is part of them learning how to think critically and how to gain their own agency. So they have to be thinking about what process they went through. They should be thinking about what things they would change. How can they prove that they are competent in this thing? What's something that they would want to change? What did it teach them about themselves? What did that experience teach them about themselves? So those are all things, like I said, the questions don't change, but the answers should. So as the students go through the semester with you and they go through a couple of these different bigger projects, they should really you should start to see some growth and some refinement in them as learners. So that's a part of how you do that. And you could do this in lots of different ways. You could have the kids keep a blog of sorts or a diary entry, or you can kind of decide what you want to do and what works best for your kids and for you. And it doesn't need to be graded. It's not something that really should be graded. It's a reflection. But it is something that there should be some time spent on. And that time amount and the reflective ability is going to be different based on whether or not it's a middle school student who's taking it or it's a senior in high school who happens to be taking this course. But it's still a good process for them to go through. Okay, enough about that. So some other assessment suggestions are down here. There's some pre-assessment suggestions, formative assessment options, and then there's a summative assessment idea down there as well. So just some things to get you started. Like I said, nothing here is hard and fast. It's not stuff that you absolutely have to do, but hopefully it gives you a place to start, or maybe it sparks an idea in you about something that you've been wanting to try with your kids. So that's certainly something that you can do. The rubrics, again, I don't know if I can get these to pull up and download in a timely manner. And I'm always looking to strengthen the rubrics that we have. So if you have one that you find has worked really well for you, or a method that's worked really well for you, please feel free to share. I'm always glad to hear about those. So these are, this is the rubric for the PSA. So you'll notice that these topics, remember they had to choose one of the topics. So these are the topics. This is a way for you to kind of keep track of that. And then these are the categories. And this is, by the way, if I downloaded it, it would be a little bit bigger, and there would be a few more items that are on there, but I don't want to take too much time to do that. But generally, you can see where they're looking for things like content and timing and appeal, and what that might look like at an approaching and a meeting and an exemplary level. So just a place for you to start. So again, you could take the rubric and modify it so that it better fits the needs for you, your needs and your student needs. But at least it gives you a place to start so you don't have to work too terribly hard. And keep in mind that these are all resources for units. So you're still doing all of the lesson plans that are leading up to this. So you're still kind of in charge of this train, as well you should be, because you are a professional educator and it's your classroom, and you know, you should have some agency over that. So this isn't necessarily going to fill your everyday, but it's just to kind of give you a place to start. So looking within the units and within the PBAs and the resources and the rubrics, this should really give you a lot of what you need to help build a course. And I know that that is it can feel a little daunting, and digital applications is brand new for all of us across the board. It's brand new for you guys, it's brand new for me, so we're kind of going through all of this together. But I want you to kind of understand that this is why all of this has been put here. It's not necessarily to hold your feet to the fire and require you to do exactly as we have put out, but it's really intended to lift up and support the things that, and supplement what you're doing, the things that you're doing within your classroom and within your school, while still providing you the flexibility that you need to be a professional educator and to meet the needs of the students that are in your classroom. So that's the resources that we have. This is the access code, and by the way, I'm going to send this access code out to everyone who is currently on the mailing list for business and information technology at both the high school and the middle school level. If there are folks who are added later on at your site, please feel free to share this access code with them. One of the things that I hate to have is for somebody to fall through the cracks because for whatever reason they got added, a section got added late for them, or they are brand new to the division and for whatever reason just aren't on anybody's list, including mine. So if that's the case, please feel free to pass along my name and contact information to them, as well as this access code, so at least they have a place to get started. And like I said, this recording will be inside the Essential Training folder, so you'll have access to that as well. I'll make sure that I add things as we move forward, but hopefully this really gives you a good overview of this course, a great way to begin diving into some resources, both for this course as well as the classroom, a place to go when you're looking for exactly what's happening at the state level. And as always, whatever questions you have, whatever needs you might have for your classroom, please feel free to reach out to me. My name is Teresa Doherty. It's teresa.doherty@bbschools.com, and you should be getting some emails from me. So I hope you guys have a great start to your year, and if you've got questions, please let me know.